Welcome to another Java tutorial, and in today's video I will be explaining how to format doubles with the PrintF and DecimalFormat class. Doubles and floats are very precise data types, meaning that depending on what values they contain, they may have many decimal places. In some applications you only want 2 or 3 decimal places instead of all of them. This is where the PrintF and DecimalFormat class come in handy. DecimalFormat is a class that contains a format method which will format a double or float variable or an operation that yields a double to 3 decimal places, meaning if you enter 25.55556, it will return 25.556. This method returns a string, which you can either assign to a new variable or print it out in a systemoutprint method. Before you use the DecimalFormat class, you have to import it. To do this, type import java.text.decimalFormat to import it. Then instantiate it by typing DecimalFormat, then give it a variable name, equals or gets the value of, and finally new DecimalFormat. Then you can call the variable name, and then you can access the format method. PrintF is a more efficient way to print out variables in comparison to println and DecimalFormat. The reason why PrintF is more efficient than the println and DecimalFormat is because you don't need to concatenate the strings with the variable. With PrintF, rather than concatenating variables, you use a variable placeholder within the string, and then at the end of the string you declare what variables are associated with it. In the table below, you can see a few placeholders that you can use. We'll see all of this in an example later. To print out variables using PrintF, put a placeholder where you want a variable to be printed, and then outside of the string, you add a comma and then all of the variables that you need in respective order. For instance, in the example below, if you are typing "this is an int" and then you want to place an int after that word int, you type %d. Do the same when you want a double or a float, using %f, and when you want a new line, using %n. After the last double quote, you put a comma and then the variables in the order in which they appear. PrintF can format floats and doubles, just like DecimalFormat can, but with more simplicity and control. To change how many decimal places are shown with a double or a float, put a period and a number between the % and letter F, and depending on what number you put will be how many decimal places are shown. For example, if you type %, then a period, number 2, and then the letter F, you will get a number with 2 decimal places. Replace the 2 with a 4, and it will show 4 decimal places instead. With DecimalFormat, you can format variables and operations that yield decimal values to new variables. You can use DecimalFormat in the print statements as well, but the drawback is that they need to be concatenated with the rest of the string. PrintF, unlike DecimalFormat, can print out variables and format doubles and floats without having to concatenate the string. You use a placeholder instead, and you associate the variable to the placeholder after the string. In conclusion, as we have seen, PrintF and DecimalFormat can both be used to format decimal values. PrintF can format decimal values and print variables without having to concatenate, and DecimalFormat can assign formatted strings to new variables. Each has their strength and weakness. Now that we've seen what PrintF and DecimalFormat are, let's take a look at a few examples of them in Java. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at what the DecimalFormat is and the PrintF, let's take a look at some of that in action. So, as from what you saw in the PowerPoint, you have to first import the DecimalFormat by putting import java text DecimalFormat. And then we must instantiate it by typing DecimalFormat. I use the word $, as my variable name, gets the value of new DecimalFormat. And I went ahead and created 3 variables, 3 double variables, one called tax rate, which is set to 0.07, the Florida tax rate, one called cost, and one called tax. And then down here I went ahead and initialized cost to 33.45, and then tax I initialized it to cost times the tax rate. So to start off, let's take a look at how this is all printed out using println. So I went ahead and said using println, and this is where I was talking about the concatenation. Everything that's inside these double quotes is one string. and everything that's inside these parentheses here will print out as one string. And so to get this string here that's inside the double quotes and get the tags part here all within the same string, you have to concatenate it by putting this plus sign. That's what I mean by concatenate. So for the second string, it says the tax is and whatever the tax amount is. And then for the last string here, it says the total is, and it's the total, which is the tax plus the cost. Let's go ahead and run it and see what it gives us. As you can see that using println, the tax is 2.345, a bunch of zeros, and then a 4. And as well with the total, it's 35.7915, and then a bunch of zeros and a 6. Now obviously this isn't how you calculate how much money you're going to be spending with all these decimals here. And that's why we have to use either printf or the decimal format. Let's go ahead now and take a look at what the printf looks like. So here I have printf using printf, and then as you can see here in this line it says printf instead of println. And in printf, the way it works is you have the string that you want. This is everything that's going to print out. The tax is, and then as I was saying in the PowerPoint, %2f, %2f. And what that means is that the float or double that's going to be in this placeholder will have 2 decimal places. And then I use the \n, which actually can be replaced with %n to print out a new line. And I'm going to go ahead and change here as well, %n to print a new line. And then at the end of each of these strings, you have to have the variable in which it will associate this placeholder with. So this %.2f is associated with this tax variable. This %.2f is associated with the result of tax plus cost. Let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. And as you can see, it prints out $2.34 with none of these leading zeros and 35.79. Now let's go ahead and take a look finally at the decimal format class. In the decimal format class, as you can remember from up here, you have to instantiate it and give it a variable. I called it $. Down here, when I'm actually using it, there's 2 ways that you can use it. You can either say the string and then concatenate it like you would normally with a println, or you can create a new string variable and assign this value to that variable and then call the variable from here. Either way is fine, they both work the same. So inside the decimal format class is the format method, and that format method has one parameter. That parameter is the double or float that's going to be formatted. So in this case, I put tax as the parameter, and then I supplied tax plus cost as the other parameter. Let's go ahead and print it out and see what happens. And as you can see now, as I said in the PowerPoint, it prints out 2.342. It has a default of 3 decimal places instead of with printf, which I can tell it how many decimal places to use. Now to demonstrate printf a little bit further, I'm going to go ahead and change this 2 to 4, and I'm going to leave the other 2 as 2. I'm going to rerun it, and you'll see now that it says 2.3415. That's because the 4 over here specifies how many decimal places to print out. I'm going to revert that back to 2, and I'm going to rerun it. This concludes today's Java tutorial. We saw how to format decimal values using decimal format and how to print variables out using printf. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.